Oh, it's the wonder of technology. I apologize for that. What was I saying? Oh, the dangers from outside the church that the church faces. There are spiritual dangers. You have people that are preaching things outside the church that we say are correct and they say are not correct. We have physical dangers from outside the church. We heard the story a couple weeks ago, I believe, of the pastor who was shot in his pulpit. I had a friend who was from college who was the youth minister at Wedgwood Baptist Church in Fort Worth, Texas. That was back in 1999, I believe, when a gunman came into youth service and opened fire and killed several people and himself. And so there are plenty of dangers that the church faces from outside these walls. But today, I'm going to talk about another danger that the church faces in the church, and it's a danger that is coming from within. And it's a much greater danger. And this is the enemy of a false gospel. It's the enemy of toleration. It's the enemy of misguided truth. This enemy is harder to spot because it does come from within the church, and it disguises itself as truth. This is what Jesus was warning about in Matthew 7:15 when he said, "Beware of the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves." The reason that it is such a dangerous enemy is because of its appeal. It seems to fit right with us. It seems to be the exact same thing that we always see every time we're in the church. It looks just like us. It carries the label Christian. And if we are going to defend ourselves against this enemy, we need people who are willing to walk the Bravehearted Path. You saw in the bulletin, you see on the screen that's the title of this message, is the Bravehearted Path. And the background for this message is 1 Corinthians 5, and we're going to read that in just a moment. The title of this message, the Bravehearted Path, and the basis of my introduction for this sermon comes from a book called The Bravehearted Gospel by Eric Ludy. And it is a book that has changed my life as I've read it over the past couple months, and it has had a great impact on me. And I would encourage you. This is the book. If any of if y'all like to read, I would encourage you to pick this book up. It's not that hard of a book to read, as far as it's not like real deep, but it will challenge you, and it challenged me, and it's what led me, I believe, to and convicted me that when Brother Eddie asked me to preach this morning, that I said, this is a message that the church needs to hear. And when I say the church, again, I don't mean just, Gospel Baptist. I mean the church in general. The church needs to hear this message about the Bravehearted Path. And I want to begin by explaining what the Bravehearted Path is. It is a path that is walked by men in the Bible such as Job and Paul. It's a path walked by church founders, our church fathers such as Athanasius and Martin Luther. It's the path walked by evangelists such as Jonathan Edwards and Leonard Ravenhill. The path walked by missionaries such as George and Elizabeth Elliot, Lottie Moon and Hudson Taylor. It is a path that I will warn you is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable, yet it is incredibly rewarding. It is a path that can be lonely, yet graciously satisfying. It is a path that is narrow and seldom traveled, and it is a path that the church today needs to find. And the way that we find this Bravehearted Path is by restoring the masculinity to the gospel message. And what has happened in the church today, according to Ludy, according to his book, is that the gospel message has been emasculated. And I'm going to explain that, and he does a much better job in his book of what I can do standing up here today preaching. I'm going to do my best to explain it, because when you hear that, it sounds like I'm about to start preaching some chauvinistic, just to the men, challenge to men kind of thing. That's not what I'm saying, and I want you to hear that. What I'm saying is, and we can see this in society. And the parallel to what has happened to the gospel is what's happening in society. Society is constantly telling us that men need to get in touch with their feminine side. Okay? How many of you women have encouraged your husband to get in touch a little bit with their feminine side? And there's nothing wrong with that, saying, you need to get in touch with your feminine side a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that. But what's happened is this emphasis has been shown so much that men need to be more caring, more gentle, and basically more like women. And it's happening is it's removing the masculine side, that masculinity. It's removing that. And we try to cover up the masculine side because it's dirty and it's rough. And that's what's happened in our society. Where we get this phrase, metrosexuals. It's where we try to prissy up our men and make them. It's trying to make a straight man look like a homosexual. That's where they get the phrase from. And it's dressing up men, getting rid of the dirt and the rough and the harsh things about what we call the masculine side and covering that up. And the same thing is happening to the gospel. Now, I'm not saying that the church itself needs to be more masculine. I'm not saying that the church has gotten too feminine. I'm not saying that we need a charge to the men to stand up and take control back over the church. I'm not saying that. There are probably some churches that need to hear that, where their men aren't standing up and taking their claim of and being the spiritual leaders. But that's not what this is about. What I mean is, we have neglected this masculine side of the gospel, the manly side of what the church and the gospel are about. Now let me explain what I mean by the feminine and masculine sides of the gospel. The feminine side is an emphasis on mercy and forgiveness. It's an emphasis on beauty and allure, an emphasis on relationship and duty, an emphasis on acceptance and embracing, an emphasis on feeling and intuition. Now these are all critical parts of a healthy gospel message. All those things have to be into the gospel presentation. On the flip side, the masculine is an emphasis on holiness and righteousness, an emphasis on conquering and achieving practical, real-world goals, an emphasis on repairing what is broken, an emphasis on the accuracy of truth and the preservation of sound doctrine, an emphasis on the just need to wage war for the right and to uproot the wrong. Now, both of those lists work together. We can't have one without the other. It's the same. It's just like a marriage. You have to have that complement of the feminine and the masculine. And both of those things work in connection with each other. They're both key parts to the gospel. You have to have the emphasis on mercy and forgiveness, and you have to have the emphasis on holiness and righteousness. You need both of those sides. But not too many people are attracted to that second list. It seems too legalistic. It seems too judgmental if we put an emphasis on those things. And that's why I said it's an uncomfortable path. But I believe that if we want to see revival in our churches, then we are going to need men and women who are willing to walk the Bravehearted Path. If we want our churches to walk this path, I think we can look at Paul's letter to the church at Corinth. If there was ever a church that needed revival, it was the church at Corinth. The city of Corinth was well known for its emphasis on philosophy, and probably more so known for its immorality. In his commentary on 1 Corinthians, William Barclay states that the name Corinth was synonymous with debauchery. When you heard Corinth, that's what you immediately thought of. You thought of evilness, wickedness. You thought immorality when you heard Corinth. And as the town, which was a commercial town, it was a town that was a trade town, brought in a lot of money. It was very wealthy, and as the town prospered, its immorality grew worse, and that immorality began to seep into the church. Paul knew that the church was having problems, so he wrote this letter in the letter, the 2 Corinthians letter that we have. He wrote that to admonish them and to correct them. The church was fighting numerous things. Okay, it was fighting immorality, and we're going to see that in 1 Corinthians 5. It was fighting immorality. It was fighting dissension. The church was fighting among themselves. It was fighting. It was dealing with the boasting of gifts, where people in the church were bragging because they had a gift that was better than somebody else. They were fighting false worship. Now, most of our churches today are not as bad as the church at Corinth. They might have one of those. They probably don't have all of them. The church at Corinth was a bad church. But there's still much that we can learn from Paul's letter to them about how to walk the Bravehearted Path and experience revival. So if you have your Bible, if you have it open to 1 Corinthians chapter 5, we're going to read verses 1 through 13. And this is Paul saying, "It is actually reported that there is immorality among you, an immorality of such kind as does not exist even among the Gentiles, that someone has his father's wife.